Good morning, brothers and sisters. It's wonderful to have you in this Zoom call on the anti-corruption. It's good to talk to you, and I hope we also start to converse with one another. Because corruption has become a worldwide phenomenon. There's literally no country in the world has been not affected by corruption. The German political scientists Johann von Lambsdorff, professor at the University of Passau in Germany, he developed in 1995 a so-called corruption perceptions index, and that index is used today to detect corruption worldwide. Transparency International is publishing annually the report. According to Transparency International, there is not a single country in the world where corruption has not become reality. The question, of course, is what is corruption and how does it come about? What raises the level of corruption in a country? And being good Christians who ask, what does God say about all of this? Well, first of all, corruption is a term which comes from the Latin word corruptio, and corruptio means as much as violating an official office in private interest. Having such positions in private life, in society, in public life, in economy or political circles, they demand certain favors for something they have not really been eligible to. And so as soon as such favors are paid, such favors are given, corruption becomes reality. So corruption is a world phenomenon. It happens almost everywhere on different scales. We distinguish today between petty corruption, which is actually, passing on certain gifts in small groups of people. So a gift here and a gift there, and you may only find out whether this is real corruption because of the quantity of such little favors. And then there is the grand corruption, which happens in governments. Today, for instance, we received the news that a number of European politicians have been arrested because of corruption done to them by the Qatari government. So Qatar has been paying money to certain European politicians, among them the vice president of the European Parliament, in order to receive a favorable influence on the European government. So they've been arrested. Grand corruption took place. And but then we talk about a daily corruption. So it's almost a system which runs through all levels of society, runs through all experiences of the daily life. So to pay a favor has become a normal thing, a normal reality. And the point in case is modern days Ukraine, a country which is in a state of war with their brotherly nation, Russia. Both countries, Russia and Ukraine, they stem from the former Soviet Union. And in the former Soviet Union, we used to say, if you do not bribe, if you do not smear or bribe or pay, you will go nowhere. Today, in Ukraine and in Russia, bribing has become a daily reality. And so you will almost do nothing without paying a favor. You can't buy, you can't sell, you can't register, you will not be able to register, to deregister. You can't finish your studies at the university. You have to pay favors, otherwise things are not developing as you wish them to develop. Corruption has become a daily reality. According to Transparency International, Ukraine is number 122 at the scale of corruption among 180 countries checked. So it's quite high. Only Russia seems to be more corrupted than Ukraine. In the midst of the war in Ukraine, we receive troubling news. In some hospitals, wounded people, soldiers and so on, are not treated properly. They are not receiving the medicine they should because they do not pay additional money for their treatment. Very few of them are able to pay anyway. So doctors are corrupted. We received troubling news of humanitarian aid brought into the country and then stolen and sold for good money, and filling pockets of corrupted business people and societal figures. We received news of politicians who have been just getting all the money given to Ukraine for rebuilding and restructuring parts of the Ukraine bombed by the Russians, and the money ends up in their private pockets, and so on and so on and so on and so on. Ukraine is a corrupted country. Corruption does not even stop at the doors of churches. At the doors of churches, even pastors and priests will try to somehow to make use of the war and the situation, the flood of goodies coming into their country. The other day I was visiting Kiev, and I visited a church recreation center near Kiev. The pastor proudly showed me the newly built building, and I discovered beds in that recreation center, which obviously was sent by my church and by people around my city where I live to a destroyed hospital bombed by the Russians in eastern Ukraine. I recognized the bed, so I asked the pastor, and he said, well, we took some of them for a higher purpose. This is a Christian center. It's a Christian recreation center. Here we take care for eternity. It's much higher. It's a much higher purpose than a hospital. Ask what happens to all those wounded, who will not be be able to come to the hospital and receive no treatment. He just did not reply. I asked him whether this act of just misappropriating some beds would be criminal. He said, well, no. I said, in my country it's punishable. He said, well, not here. In Ukraine it's not punishable. And everybody understands what we do. So I asked him whether God understands what he does. Does God understand such behavior? He had an urgent appointment, so he had to leave, and he did not reply. He didn't give me any answer. Does God understand bribery? Does God understand corruption? Well, he does, but he also names it. And the Bible is very clear about this. The Bible names corruption a problem. In James chapter 4, verse 1 to 4, we'll read how James answers the questions, where does strife come from among Christians? And his answer is, doesn't it come from your lusts, which strive in your members? You have become covetous and do not obtain it. You murder and envy and gain nothing. You quarrel and fight, and you have nothing because you do not ask. And you ask and do not receive because you ask with an evil intent, that you may waste it in your own lusts. You adulterous, do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? He who wants to be the friend of the world will be God's enemy. For James, it's human lusts. It's a human desire. It's a godless spirit which drives the issue of corruption. And Apostle Paul writes in Ephesians chapter 2, 1 to 3, that it is more than that. It is the Spirit who reigns in the world, who drives us to do the will of our thoughts and desires, and we become men and women of anger. People become corrupt, and that they turn away from God. First, the relationship with God is destroyed. Secondly, their own satisfaction pattern are corrupted. And thirdly, they start to corrupt their relationship to people. And fourthly, even their relationship to creation is then at stake. And this is a huge problem. This is a huge problem. The problem which we discuss is creating corruption. It's a godly man who do not corrupt, ungodly who are corrupted. Peter states that corruption in the world is in a world without God. Second Peter 1-4. The Bible is clear about corruption, very clear about corruption. It is saying, I quote Psalm 14, 1-3, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is no one who does good. The Lord looks down from heaven on all mankind to see if there are any who understand, any who seeks God. All they have turned away. All have become corrupt. There is no one who does good, not even a single one. Psalm 14, 1-3. And the prophet Isaiah says, sons who act corruptly, they have abandoned the Lord. Isaiah 1:4. No wonder corruption is developing high in the countries of professed atheism, such as the former Soviet Union or the following successor states of the former Soviet Union. And now, of course, corruption comes to our Western countries. With growing secularism and the advance of secularism, we see corruption becoming reality. Corruption usually follows material interests. Its public face is mammon, money, property. Apostle Paul writes to his disciple Timothy that those who want to become rich, they fall into temptation and become corrupt. Those who want to become rich, they have been lusted and experience much pain. 1 Timothy 6, 9-10. According to Jesus, it's impossible to serve God and mammon at the same time, because the source of all evil is mammon, is greed for money. So what does corruption look like in our world today? Even a cursory examination of the subject shows how complex, cunning, and amazingly versatile this phenomenon is. People who seek their own advantage are becoming more inventive every day. No wonder the evil himself, the devil, is behind creating corruption in the world. He is the seducer of the world around us. In the blink of an eye, bribes become small gifts, and political corruption is easily declared to be just a lobbying experience. And big corporations pay bribes, and then they say, well, this has been a needed investment, starting expenditure, as they may call it. What would be punished in our countries in the West goes empty in some of other countries. It's accepted as a normal experience. Just a few days ago, a German pastor came to me and he told me he is preparing to bring some humanitarian aid to Ukraine. And then he said, well, I was told there is lots of corruption in the Ukraine and you have to pay bribes to the police, otherwise you will not move ahead properly. I said, well, sure, that's right, that's what it is. So how much money do I take along in order to come through? He asked me. I said, but this is corruption. You don't want to encourage corruption in Ukraine, do you? And he replied with a smile in his eyes, but isn't the people in Ukraine freezing? Are they not freezing? Would a bit corruption, a bit bribe not be allowed in order to help them, not to freeze as they do? I don't think it is all right. I don't think it's right, because it's wrong. It is sin. And I advised my friend, instead of taking money along And instead of trying to pay those politicians enough money in order to move through Ukraine, he should start praying and cast out demons of corruption out of the country, as my good friends in Central Asia do. In one of the Central Asian countries, they were so fed up with the tax collectors, always wanting to receive some favors. They started to go every Saturday to the building of the tax officers and pray there and cast out demons and ask the Lord to take over the place. To their big surprise, the government all of a sudden declared to start an anti-corruption campaign, and the first place they inspected was exactly the tax office. So things have been changing, casting out demons instead of accepting a typical behavior. I think that's our way to go. Corruption in the world is evil made. It's an evil phenomenon. And the Bible teaches us that our fight is not against blood and flesh, but instead against powers of demonic realities. Fighting them is not only allowed, it's a command. And corruption is the result of their work in the world. So let's stand together and fight corruption and fight demons wherever it's possible. May the Lord bless you.